Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Inside CHAINge, Reshape the Future of Supply Chain. My name is Bart A. I'm an independent advisor and industry expert. I've been in supply chain for over 30 years and I'm your chair for the CHAINge event. And today I have a very special guest here with me, my dear friend Henrik von Scheel. He's joining us from Switzerland. Henrik, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. And I'm so happy to join you, Bart. I've been a big fan of yours for a while.
I appreciate that. I think we have quite a few things in common. I know that both of us come from smaller countries in Europe. You come from Denmark, I believe. I come from Belgium myself. The other point is neither of us live in our homeland. You live in Switzerland currently. I live in the United States, been here for over 20 years. And we are also, something else we have in common, very passionate about supply chain. And I think we have some very strong ideas about that. So let's dive right into some of the topics we wanted to discuss today, into what's really shaping the supply chain and obviously what's top of mind for everyone. And I think even when we talked last time, a lot has happened in just a week when we talk about things like tariffs. So, Henrik, what's your view on what's happening in the world? And I think the other part is you living in Europe, me living in North America. I think if we would only watch TV or read the newspapers, we probably would have a completely different view of the world. But obviously, we look at it from a global perspective and really look at the reality of how it's affecting supply chain. But I wanted to get your insight on what your view is on what's happening and how it's impacting supply chain.
Well, thank you very much. Well, yes, of course, I'm Danish and I'm living in Switzerland. That's the nice background and the behind. And so I'm a homegrown manufacturing boy, right? So I've been supporting Lego and Maersk and all these big guys, small Danish companies. That's where I grew up. And then everything within manufacturing or transportation always relates to supply chain. And so that's where my big passion for supply chain comes in. And the one thing that you see in tariffs today, it is shaping up the core of everybody. All right. And it does it because somehow we had COVID a couple of years ago, and they should have changed some of the core principles. One third of the supply chain is all gathered together. They should have rethought to take supply chain from technology driven, from cost driven to profit driven model to be more resilient. And now, as the tariffs are hitting, you see how vulnerable they are because they have an inability to be resilient. And supply chain at the core is about integrated business planning. It's projecting forward, assessing the risk, and if you're unable to be resilient in this, that's where you're going to be hit. And the tariffs are at the core hitting six key plays, right? It's hitting the price on what you import. It's hitting the price that you can give to your consumers. It's reshaping your current supply chain flow and setup. And it's changing your lead time on inventory or on your forecast or on your demand planning. So all of this is at the core changing something that you don't want to do. So this has a long-term fundamental reset at the supply chain. After this tariffs that will go through, um, the intent of tariffs is that US wants to bring production lines back to the US. So it will change how companies are positioning themselves to supply, but it will change the entire setup of the supply chain. And so one thing that people are a little bit blindsided by is tariffs go hand in hand with the trade routes, and the trade routes have very specific meaning. So, for example, for Europe, we're on the One Belt Road. We are at the end of the sausage of the One Belt Road, right? We are establishing the Dutch element that goes down Africa and so on, but that's the long road. And then you have the European African route, and then you have all the corridors. And US has this hiccup effect on the trade routes with South America. They are speaking out of both sides of their mouth, so they want to do it, but they're not really creating the infrastructure for it. So it's some sort of right. And then the third element on the US is that their own infrastructure on supply chain has a very strong investment requirement, right? So you have transportation routes for the trucks, for the railroad, for the economic road. So many of these elements you need for supply chain to work are just old and old-fashioned. Sorry to
Yeah, I
take
think
so
you're
much time.
absolutely right, Henrik. I mean, the infrastructure is set up for the way we're doing business today, but not on a changing business. And like you said, right? I mean, these tariffs are impacting consumers and they're impacting them, hitting them very hard because look at, for example, food and beverage, right? We all go to the grocery store. So you buy, whether it's a can of soda or you're buying a can of vegetables, the raw material price is going up. The cost of the cans going up with the 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. And then your logistics cost is going up, right? Because these ships are getting punitive damages when they, or penalties when they come to the ports, right? Up to almost 1.5 million per call of port, especially if you're a Chinese ship.
Yeah.
And then we just saw recently an announcement that the major truck manufacturer is going to increase the price of their trucks because of the increase in price and tariffs of steel and aluminum. And so that's also going to create an increase in carrier cost and logistics cost for trucking. So consumers obviously going to get impacted, and that in turn is going to impact demand, and demand in turn is going to impact the whole supply chain. So a lot of different things. So if we look kind of a little bit forward, Henrik, how do companies really, kind of prepare for that? And how do we really prepare for that future of supply chain? And we should look at it not just obviously from a technology perspective, but should they really, let's start by strategy. What's a core strategy they should really get into to make sure that they're ready for that future supply chain?
So first, I'm excited to be both at the US event and the Belgium event on supply chain, right? And I'm excited to cover something which I haven't normally covered that much, but I think in supply chain, it's more important before we talk about the future that we are talking about what is the strategic imperatives and what is the core thing that is changing the nature of how supply chain works. And so I think this is the first time I will try to take a 3 steps before I touch the strategy, right? Because strategy is the one thing that we all use. It's like a hype word, but it's very difficult to apply because most strategies in supply chain are actually not strategies. They are continuous improvement plans, right? So you release a budget on what you want to improve and what you want to do. You add a little bit technology to it, right? So you're not changing the core of it. And strategy by design are actually only 3 things, right? Strategy is a set of choices in terms of what not to do. So you're choosing on a chessboard, what is the lever I want, where I have the biggest amount of power for my horse, for
Mhm.
example. And then so you choose where not to play, right? So you choose where to win. That's the first step. And then the second step is you choose how to differentiate. And supply chain at the core is all about differentiation because minimum it's comparative differentiation. If not, it's hyper competition. And so supply chain is all about the pricing, how to deliver, and all of this, right? And then the third point in strategy is about how you focus on execution, what you focus on and how you do it. So these are the 3 steps in strategy. And most of them, some of these new management principles, I want to go through with them on the CHAINge event because but for you, what you learned in school 10 years ago in strategy, is it the same principles you apply today?
No, I would say it isn't, right? And I would even say the bigger problem in supply chain that I see is a lot of time there is no strategy. It's still very operational and tactical in nature. And I think we discussed this before that with COVID, we might have been awoken from a little bit of a deeper sleep, but then kind of COVID passed and we went kind of back to that sleep. So we haven't really transformed that much. And so I really think that companies need to have a bigger vision for change. And I think that's why we call the event CHAINge as well, because we're really at that inflection point where supply chains need to change if they want to stay competitive, if they want to stay ready to face the consumer, the customer in the way they want to be treated, and do that in a world that's very disrupted,
Yeah.
that's very real time. But that creates a lot more of a strategic change in the sense that it's not just here and there. It's like organizations need to change, processes need to change, people need to change, and that's a lot of work, but it's something that's necessary.
Yeah. So some of the things I want to highlight, and I'm excited to meet the people to connect on this, right? One is like the core element that is changing in supply chain is the global economic power shift.
Mhm.
That means the smaller countries are not playing in the powerhouse anymore. US is drawing back and let the other ones play. The economic system is being reset. The powerhouse is being reset. We have the One Belt Road, which is 75% of the economy and workforce. And then I want to look at what are the 8 strategic imperatives that are driving this change in supply chain management. And by that, we have not even come to the future, the mega trends that are driving that. And then I want to come down to the level of saying, good, what are the 34 mega trends that are driving the future of supply chain? And they're divided up in a trend radar in terms of best practices that are driving productivity. So they are technology driven. They are driven for in terms of how you get better visibility, collaborative intelligence, AI, and all of this. And then you have the other portions, which is the resilience enablers, right? How do you get resiliency for your risk planning, intelligence risk planning, your the workforce, for your value chain, so your customer chain and your value chain, how they're integrating together, right? Because there's some core elements that are changing, right? Your internet, your access to the consumers is changing, right? Your access to your procurement is also changing because AI gouging is reality for most of them, right? And then the last bit are the 5 pieces on growth enablers, right? So one principle that is new in strategy is financial reengineering. So normally what is the financial principles on how to do inventory financing, how to do procurement is actually changing at the core, right? How to profit from sustainability, because sustainability is the one that hits supply chain the hardest. It doesn't matter if you're in the US or Europe and so on, because CBAM or whatever you are, when you're shipping a product, you're either receiving a debit or you're receiving a credit. So
Mm.
you
Yeah.
somehow need to manage that in your balance sheet. So these are very, very big elements that are impacting suppliers, not small. And then the last bit I want to discuss with them, actually, what are the management principles you need to manage your operation and your tactical supply chain and your strategy in supply chain, because they're not the same. To my big surprise, when you talk to operational managers, they all talk about operational excellence, like this is a meal they eat every night. But when you ask them, so how do you actually create operational excellence, right? So there's 6 business models. And if you don't know the sequence on when you do what in which manner to achieve what, you're just doing cost cuttings. So, and then I want to highlight some of these reality checks on AI, right? So, AI gives the great promise of 30% productivity increase and cost reduction of 24% for supply chain management. Reality looks a little bit different, right? Change management and investment in reskilling of people nearly pulls out half of the benefits that you receive. And then when you look on your investment, you look at saying, "Ooh, right? Am I waiting on the maturity for it to mature, or is it really adding me the benefit, right?" So these are the principles I want to go through.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm very intrigued by that. I know you had a couple of slides. I don't know if you want to pull it up to just give a little bit of a teaser into that, but you're very right. And I would fully agree on the AI part. There's so much going on about AI. And again, in supply chain, a lot of times we're going from very manual to then AI, which has that promise of automation. But how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that without addressing the other parts? Is making sure that you still have the customer at mind, you still have your people at mind, You're working on the strategy. Again, AI purely as a technology without doing the other parts of the work, which by the way are a lot harder. The technology sometimes has become the easy part. It's not going to work. And I think where the biggest promises of AI is really at that intersection of the people intelligence and the artificial intelligence by empowering your people, by giving the tools to do things faster. It's a little bit like we all have an iPhone, right? Our iPhone now has AI, and you go like, well, how is that different? Well, remember how 10 years ago when we had an iPhone, we had to put in
Yeah.
our code. And if you were like me, you have kind of like fatter fingers, you fat finger everything. And now you just look at the thing, it opens up. What's the difference? It's still the same. You have access to the phone, but it's a lot easier and a lot faster. And I think that's how these tools are. And I think we kind of came into supply chain probably a similar time, late 80s, early 90s. And that was the time where everyone was getting laptops. And even then, people said, oh, we're now getting all computers, personal computers and laptops. It's going to completely wipe jobs away. Well, no, it didn't wipe jobs away. We all still had jobs, and we were doing things differently, right? Back in the day, I was in financial audit with Ernst and Young, such an incredibly
Yeah.
interesting part, but I wanted to learn to read a balance sheet and the P&L. And back then you had to go through these, really big binders of paper and do things manually. And then we had a laptop, we had Excel and a macro, and that instead of taking days and days going through paper, it took us 15 minutes. But it really creates a way of saying, how do we work differently? How do we work more efficiently? So with that being said, I like this slide, by the way. So maybe give us a little bit of a sneak peek, Henrik, from what you're presenting in Brussels as well as in North America around maybe one or two of these and how people should really think about this global economic power shift.
So this is the global economic power shift that is happening, right? So it's not like you wake up in supply chain and says global economic power shift, but that's changing the core of how supply chain is operating. And there are 8 pillars to that. And I will go through these pillars, and then I will, and that's going to be the interesting part because tariffs is just a subset of global economic reset, right? And it changes the competitiveness intensity. So what I then want to go through, and this is actually what I do at the Strategic Intelligence, the company I co-own. We supply all the information for the World Economic Forum and for BlackRock and all of them. So you will see this information exclusively without paying big reports, right? So this is the future of supply chain, the mega trends. And so this is what I will go through in details with you, Bart, and with the teams. And so I will give a keynote, but I actually want to be also interactive with the people so they have a good feeling of these hype words that they know what it is. So at Hannover Messe last week, I gave a keynote address and I announced Digital 2.0 and smart automation. So you noticed how all the consultant companies wrote 2.0 up on their posters and all of this. So I will go through in details what does it actually mean for supply chain, right? Because it changes the way you work on it. Because supply chain is very good at business process management. You map what you do, right? But most of them haven't defined the workflow, how you do it.
Right.
And that changes the digital setup. So if you don't have this digital maturity already set up line one, you cannot go to line two. So I think this will be one topic that everybody would be very, very keen on saying, whoa, why? Because in the workflow, you're suddenly connecting digitalization to your integrated business planning, right? So suddenly everything you do outside in an Excel sheet comes alive, right? So my assessment is with digitalization 2.0, I actually think most supply chains can reorganize the people for what is important because today most of them support a cost center to maintain the IT of supply chain rather than the operations of supply chain. And I think this is a huge shift that is coming, and that will actually make supply chain more agile and more resilient. The words we want, but we don't know how to do.
So what I hear you say, Henrik, is we really have a great opportunity ahead of us, right? In making changes that really going to make our organization stronger. Did I get that right?
Yes, spot on.
Very
Spot on,
good.
right? And there's some words on that most have never really heard on, right? Have you heard about shadow AI?
I actually have, but I'd say probably people don't know what that is, right?
Yeah. So AI, they always talk about how to do productivity, but if the
Hmm.
AI, they come down and says shadow AI is the compliance you bring in supply chain to make sure that your CFO or the people in supply chain are not exporting because they become a little bit lazy bums and they're a little
Hmm.
bit time pressured. They export it via ChatGPT or some other large language model. They export their supply information. They export their pricing information, which is actually the core of supply chain, right? So this is
Yeah.
actually enforcing how you protect the core of your information because you differentiate on that, right? And then the other part of shadow AI is that you are investigating and looking at how is AI gouging coming into my procurement chain? Is something changing there, and how do I connect more to them? Because we know it enters there really fast. It just takes a timeline of 3 to 4 months for the procurement officer and sourcing officer to realize, I don't know what's happening with our partner. Cannot just be the energy price that is increasing, right? We're going to this partner, this partner, and this partner, and sourcing the same product, and the price is just increasing by 15%. Cannot be tariffs. It cannot be energy. It cannot, right? So that's them aligning the pricing via an AI agent. And that's
Well,
happening.
I can tell you when I look at some of these, some of them really kind of stick out for me, and I'm looking so much forward to hearing more about them. Things like collaborative intelligence, profit from sustainability. So definitely looking forward to hearing you talk about that, Henrik. First off in Brussels and then again in Columbus, Ohio. And just for everyone online, Brussels, we will see you there June 17th and 18th. And Henrik, I think you will be speaking on June 18th on this topic. Very interesting. I'm so happy you were able to join us today. Great conversations. I'm going to let you go and enjoy that beautiful view. I can see a little bit of the reflection behind you. And I think when I hear you, I kind of am quite hopeful. And I think a lot of people think supply chain, it's really down, but it's a little bit like looking at the mountain, looking at that mountaintop. If we do things right, we can reach the top and the view is going to be great. But we want to have to, or we have to put the work in to get to the top, to create the right strategy and the right path to get there. So
Yeah.
again, Henrik,
Yeah.
maybe a final word from you, but I'm going to thank you for
So, so
being on the
Bart,
webinar.
I do think the event is important because we live in the greatest times for supply chain management. I mean, like this is the biggest opportunity in supply chain management to get the latest insight, to collaborate with peers, and to think about how they can apply it. Either move to a new company because you are networking, or you just need to know what are the practices, or you collaborate together with you, Bart, and says, guys, right, we don't want to co-invest in all of that. Can we partner with 2, 3 other supply chains and co-invest so we can share the best practices, right? The one thing in supply chain, sometimes you don't compete, you can collaborate together. And going to you, Bart, or to the CHAINge is the ability to collaborate together to define best practices and industry practices. Because if I'm very honest, most best practices I see are actually not best practices. They're not replicatable by somebody else. And I think to have industry experts that agree on something, we don't have to reinvent the wheel on everything we do. I'm sorry, we don't. So I think that's why I'm so excited on that event because I think this is the time for supply chain to shine.
Well, great last words. We're going to leave it at that. Thank you again, Henrik. I look forward to seeing you in Brussels in June. And to all the viewers, I look forward to seeing you all there as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you at CHAINge in Brussels, or if you're in the US or somewhere else in the world, we'll see you in September in Columbus, Ohio.